Reading a whole bunch of Irish authors in March is genuinely cheaper than booking a plane ticket home, and that is on inflation. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today we are wrapping up everything that I read or tried to read in March. March is a particularly special month for me because it is when I spend the entire 31 days concentrating only on Irish authors. And that doesn't kind of close me off in any way, because there are genuinely so many fantastic genres, so many fantastic stories that you can come across just by reading authors from your own country. There is a kind of a way of thinking about some people that Irish stories are only bleak, that it's only contemporary fiction, that there's not a whole lot that you can discover from. But I think that this video I've got for you today will definitely blow that theory to smithereens. Across the month of March, I read 11 books and then DNF'd another 3 of them. Of the 11 books that I read, 9 of them were intended for adult readers, whereas 2 of them were written for children. I read 2 books physically and 9 were audiobooks, all of that totaling to 633 pages and 70 hours of audiobook listening. For the genres, which is where it gets pretty exciting, I read 1 thriller book, 1 mystery book, 3 non-fictions, 2 contemporary, and 4 historical fiction. I think this is one of the highest months that I've had for historical fiction in a really long time, and I am really starting to rediscover my love of historical fiction. For the star ratings, 2 books got a 5-star rating, another 2 got a 4.5-star rating, 3 books got 4 stars, 1 book got 3.5 stars, and the 3 non-fiction books that I read all did not get a rating at all because I don't rate non-fiction. I don't feel like it's appropriate to give somebody's lived story a star rating, or to say, oh my god, this thing that happened to you was so awful, but I don't like the way you told it, so I'm only giving you 1 star. I don't think that it is in any way appropriate for me to give a numerical value to somebody's life story, so I have stopped giving any non-fiction a rating. As always, let's start with the books that I DNF'd, and the first of those was Moving On by Roisin Meany. I was really excited about this one because it was about a young girl named Ellie who left her small hometown to move to Galway City, and Galway is my favourite place in the entire country. I've been to Galway so many times. My parents and my family and I used to always go to Galway in the August bank holiday and spend the weekend there and just walk around and immerse ourselves in the atmosphere that's in Galway. But this story really just didn't work for me. I found the writing was just so slow. I felt like I was about 20 or so percent of the way through the book and nothing of note had been happening, and I didn't particularly care about a lot of the characters in this book. We follow Ellie as she moves to Galway and moves in with her aunt, who is particularly curmudgeonly. I just didn't warm to her aunt in any way, and while she did have a little bit of a turnaround towards the end of the parts that I had read, I never still really warmed to her at all. But the person who I really didn't warm to across the entire book was actually Ellie's friend Claire. I felt that Claire was such a horrible person. She made so many difficult choices that I never stood behind anything that was that she was doing. Claire would steal men from Ellie, or she would turn up at Ellie's house and say, I'm going to stay with you for the evening, and then disappear into the night and not come back until 11 or 12 the following morning. I don't think that she was the kind of person that Ellie should have been friends with, and I really wish that this story had turned out differently. This story just didn't really work for me, and I don't think I've read any other Roisin Meany books in the past, but I probably won't be going to pick up any more in the future. The next book that I DNF'd, I kind of didn't give it a whole shot, so I might go back to it in the future, but that was How to Build a Bow by Elaine Feeney. It's about a young boy called Jamie. He's about 13 or so years old. He is autistic, and he is going through a whole lot of changes in his life. He's going to secondary school for the first time, his parents have died, and I just didn't really get involved in this book. I don't know if it was because I just wasn't in a reading mood at the time. I went through a little bit of a reading dip in the middle of March. I won't necessarily call it a reading slump, but there were just a couple of days that nothing was really grabbing my attention. Maybe this is a casualty of that, and I just needed to read it at a different time, but Jamie's story just didn't really grab me in this time. The last book that I DNF'd was The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley, and I was upset by this one. I gave this a real college try. I think I got to about 40 or so percent of this book when I realised that I did not care about a single character in here. I do not care about rich white people's problems. And that was the entire basis of this book. It was about a group of friends who had known each other for about 15 years, and they were all at the opening weekend of the Manor, which was a really big, really exclusive resort in the Scottish Highlands. There was another woman who was kind of pretending to be somebody that she wasn't, and she also propositioned one of the wait staff. And I really did not enjoy that part of this book. I just did not care for a single character here. And when you are a character driven reader, not giving a shit about any of the characters that you've been reading is like the death toll for a book. Lucy Foley and I have had a pretty tumultuous relationship. I really enjoyed the guest list, but I also DNF'd the Paris apartment. So maybe it's time for us to say our goodbyes. I might give her one more try because I have got the hunting party back at home in Ireland. But if that one doesn't work out for me, I think Lucy and I are just going to have to go our separate ways. So, on to the books that I did finish in March. And the first one that I finished was The Stolen Child by Carmel Harrington. I absolutely loved this thriller and I gave it 4.5 stars to kick off the month on a really high note. This book follows the Murphy family, Jason, his wife Kimberly, and their 2 children, Robert and Lily. Robert is actually Kimberly's son from a previous relationship, but Jason has been raising him just as if he were his own child. On a family cruise in Barcelona, they go to bed one evening and wake up the following morning to see Robert's bed is empty. This sets off panic. Everybody is concerned about the whereabouts of this 2.5-year-old child, but there are a couple of questions being asked of the family because they have seen Jason being a little bit harsh with his son while they were at the pool the day before. Fast forward about 40 or so years later, and Lily is now working in Dublin as a therapist. Her father is still working with the Missing Child Agency, which he has set up after the disappearance of Robert, and he has just gone on national television to give a one more appeal to find if anybody has seen Robert, because coming up to his birthday, they've actually received a couple of what he would look like now images. Zach is one of Lily's new clients. He walks into the room and he tells Lily that he's pretty sure that he might actually be Robert. He has seen Jason's appeal and he thinks that there's a couple of things that are adding up for him. What follows is a huge drive around Europe, trying to answer questions, trying to figure out some facts about the whole situation. And you find out a lot more about the Murphy family that have been hidden for years and years. This was Carmel Harrington's first thriller, and it was also the first book of hers that I've ever read. So I didn't particularly know what to expect when I was going in here, but this gripped me and I just could not let it go. I spent so much time with the Murphy family trying to figure out where Robert was, trying to put all of the pieces together, to put all of the clues into one place. And every turn of this book completely took me by surprise. There was never anything that I felt like I had completely guessed this right. I did make a couple of notes as I was going along that, oh, I think that it might be this thing, or I think this person is this thing, and there just was never a time that I had made the correct choice. There is also a tandem story taking place way back in the past, in the 1950s or 60s, where you're following Sally and Elsie. The 2 girls meet each other as they are living in a foster home which is run by nuns. And then you go through Sally and Elsie's lives as adults. The places that they are working, the places where they are living, the kind of separations that they have with one another, but then coming back together as really close and really good friends. And Sally's tumultuous and abusive marriage. I spent so much of this novel trying to put those pieces together. Why am I finding out about these 2 women back in the 1950s or 60s? What is the correlation with the Murphy family and the story that's happening now? And when everything started to jigsaw in together, I was thrown away by it. There were a couple of times that I had question marks. There were a couple of times that I had eyebrow raises. But when we actually get the full-on story, I was just blown away by it. The story has got a couple of similarities to the Madeleine McCann story, where you've got a young child with their family on holiday in the Mediterranean and the young child goes missing, and there's a question of, did you leave the child alone at any time? Did you drug them? Did you do anything to them? Are you the ones who is responsible for their disappearance? And the whole way while I was reading through this book, I kept seeing slight similarities to the Madeleine McCann story. So if that's something that you are familiar with, there will definitely be a couple of things that you'll notice here. I listened to the audiobook of this and I really have to commend the narrator here because she was phenomenal with accents. There were so many different nationalities and so many different accents that had to be tackled throughout this book. There are Scottish characters, there are American characters, there are Spanish characters, and all of them were done flawlessly. But there was just one thing that annoyed me the entire way throughout this book. Every couple of minutes, you could hear the narrator swallowing back saliva or clearing their throat a little bit. And I just think that that could have been edited out a little bit better just to make the flow a little bit easier. Because I listened through it through headphones while I was out for a walk or while I was doing the grocery shops, I had it right in my brain the entire time, rather than if I was at my desk and I just had my phone beside me playing out freely. And while it's blasting straight into your ears, it is just a little bit off-putting. But overall, I had a phenomenal time with this story. I haven't read any other Carmel Harrington books, as I've said, but this is definitely one that might open up the doors to her back catalogue for me. Then, to counterbalance that little dip that I told you about, I went back and reread one of the best books that I read in 2022. That was Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, and it hit just as hard the second time. This is set in Wexford in the 1980s, and it is about Bill Furlong and his family. Bill is a coal driver, and he goes around their small town in Wexford delivering coals to families, to businesses, and it's basically about all of the hardship that people were going through in the 1980s. It was a huge time of economic recession back in Ireland, and there was also a lot of control by the Catholic Church, particularly in the terms of mother and baby homes. Mother and baby homes are a pretty big stain on our social history, and it's where young unmarried women who were pregnant were sent to kind of atone for their sins. And these homes were absolutely hell on earth. These women were subjected to torture. They were basically kept as maids for the entire time that they were there, having to clean laundry for the community or sew or bake. And there was absolutely no freedom and no protection for these women. One day, while Bill is delivering coal to the Abbey around Christmas time, he starts to realise what is actually happening behind the closed doors. And this really starts to make him think about his place in the community and if he is okay with all of these things happening. This has recently been turned into a film starring Cillian Murphy, and I haven't seen the film yet, but it's one that I really, really want to go and watch. I have a feeling that the adaptation is going to be particularly true to the source material, and that is something that I look forward to in an adaptation. I know that it was in the Berlinale Festival last year around this time, but I never got the opportunity to go and get it because tickets were like hen's teeth. Everybody wanted to go and see it. But if I can find a copy of it somewhere, it's definitely one that when I'm ready to go into it, I am definitely going to go and check this one out. I have read a couple of other Claire Keegan books, and there is another one that's going to come up later on in here, but this one is the absolute pinnacle for me. Then I read This Is Not About You by Rosemary McCabe. This is her memoir, and this looks back on Rosemary's dating life right from when she was in her teenage years to the life that she is living now. And I thought that this was such an interesting look at how people's dating lives evolve and change as they get older, and how people themselves change as they are dating. Because when Rosemary started dating, she was in Ireland, she was kind of looking at the dating pool here, but now she is living in the US, married to an American, and has 2 children of her own. It's a really great look at how you can kind of disappear into a relationship, how you can change yourself to make a relationship work better in the way that you think it's going to work better. And basically how being somebody else's other half can really impact your life. Something that I thought was particularly interesting is the dating scene in Ireland versus dating scene in the US, something that Rosemary has experienced in both columns. In the US, it's not uncommon to marry young and to be already divorced by the time you get to my age. Whereas in Ireland, we have a tendency to marry a little bit later in life, and we will often be with the same partner for about 10 or so years before we'll even consider an engagement. I know a lot of people who are around my age, which is the early 30s, who are in the US, who've been married for 8 to 10 years by this stage. Whereas a lot of people that I know in Ireland who are around my age have only been married for about 3 to 5 years, but have known their partner since they were maybe 16 or 17. And I think that this is just a little bit as how the differences work out here. It's a whole lot more earlier commitment, but it's the same length of a commitment. You're just doing the extra things a little bit later in life here. We do get a look at some of the partners that Rosemary has had throughout her entire life, and there are particular shout outs that need to be given. First of all, to Murph and to Johnny, 2 of the worst men that have ever existed in human history, but also to Liam on the other side of the coin. I think Liam is the relationship that Rosemary was in when I started to discover her on social media. And I remember seeing him coming up in her social media posts a lot. She had talked about him a little bit. She was talking about Quillon, the dog that they had both adopted together. And although their relationship didn't work out romantically, they are still such good friends to this day. I would borrow from First Time Caller by BK Barrison and call them platonic soulmates. which was such a wonderful thing to see. I think it's such a beautiful thing when, if a relationship doesn't work out romantically, sometimes it's okay for you to just be friends with one another. And I'm not saying you have to be in each other's front pockets and you have to be in everything in each other's lives, but even if you are just checking in now and then with one another, if there is the capacity to do so, I think it was done and talked about so well here. But of course, the pinnacle of Rosemary's dating life is her marriage to her husband, Brandon, who is from the US, and of course, the two children that they share together, as well as her stepson from Brandon's other marriage. I really loved taking a look at what Rosemary's dating life in the US was like, particularly because it started right at the beginning of the pandemic. And every country had completely different rules and regulations about how they wanted people to interact with each other, or if they wanted them to interact at all at the beginning of the pandemic. So I thought that the systems that they had set up for one another and the ways that they kept in each other's lives, even when the world was so changeable, was so wonderful to see. There's a whole lot of love when Rosemary talks about Brendan. There's a whole lot of love when she talks about her new life. And I am so excited to see what happens for her in the future. She's one of my favourite writers that has come out of Ireland, and I am so ready to see where the road takes her. Then I read 2 books for a vlog that I did where I looked at my bookshelves and read 3 books that I wanted to read in 2024 but never got the chance to. The first one that I read for those was The Snag List by Sophie White. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I go into quite a bit of it in the vlog, but this is a kind of a Stepford Wives tale about a group of people who have moved into a really new, really snazzy, very luxurious housing estate in the middle of Ireland. It follows Lindy, Ro, and Alva, all of whom are dealing with their own trials and tribulations in life. Lindy's 11-year-old son, Max, is the star of Maxed Out, a YouTube channel which he runs with his father. And they're not entirely sure if this is the relationship that they want with him. It does feel a little bit more boss and worker rather than mother and son, and Lindy is adamant that she wants to take Max away from the spotlight and just to give him a normal growing up period now. Ro and her husband Eddie have been together for a couple of years and it's starting to look like they want to have children, except Ro is not really on board with that. She's not in any way sure that she wants to have a child right now, but Eddie is really pushing for it, and he thinks that coming to Monterey Valley is going to be the perfect time to get their family started. I will say some of the decisions that Ro makes throughout this book really did not work for me. They completely turned my stomach. I don't know if there was any situation where Ro was my favourite character in this book. Then there's Alva. Alva and her husband Tom met about 15 or so months ago, and it was a complete whirlwind romance. It also resulted in a pregnancy, and Alva is staying at home right now looking after their newborn daughter Tilly. Tom is going back to the US where he can set up and develop his company. Alva is a little bit concerned though. Around the time that she and Tom met, she also had a one-night stand with Sebastian, one of her friends, and now she's not sure who Tilly's actual father is. This was such a tumultuous time, and I feel like Alva kept digging herself deeper and deeper and deeper into holes that she just couldn't bring herself back out from. And I really found it to be a quite messy story, full of drama and full of, oh my god, what's going to happen next, that I just could not put down. I gave this book a 4-star rating. I've read a couple of other books from Sophie White, particularly in this situation where it's 3 women, all of them are put together in a similar situation and they all have to try and band together. And that is a storyline that I think she does so well. The other book that I read for that vlog was Calla by Colin Walsh. This book is about a set of 6 teenagers who were all best friends back in around 2003, and one of them was Calla, or Catherine Lannon. One day, Calla goes missing, and this is still a mystery to this day, except that human remains have been found, and it looks like the case is about to come to a close. 3 of the members of that friendship group, Joe, Mush, and Helen, are the 3 characters that we are focusing on for much of this book. Joe is a worldwide famous musician and is living in LA, but is actually just coming back to the town just so that he can see his family. Helen is back in town from Canada for a family wedding, and Mush has never left the community. He's been living here since the day dot, and he is now working in his mother's cafe, but he doesn't really know anything of the world outside of that. I gave this one a 3.5-star rating because it just didn't impress me as much as the Snag List did, and there were a couple of reasons for that. One of the big reasons is that there are so many characters that you need to keep a track of. Now, thankfully, there is a dramatis personae right at the beginning of this book, so you can keep track of who it is that you need to know about and why it is that you are learning about them. But as we get deeper into this book, more and more characters start coming out of the woodwork, and there were so many people that I had to try and keep track of. I found it a little bit overwhelming at times when there were so many people to keep track of. It just took away from the book for me a little bit. I felt that something had happened on the blurb happens a little bit too late in this book. We're told in the blurb that two teenagers go missing, and these teenagers turn out to be cousins of Mush, Donna and Marie. But I feel like that didn't happen until about 60 or 70% of the way through this book. And I needed there to be a little bit more of a push towards that. I needed it to happen a little bit earlier on so that I could actually get invested in what was happening, and so that I could get invested in trying to find out what happened to them and trying to bring them back safely. This book has a content warning for animal cruelty, as there are a couple of instances of animal fighting in here, particularly dog fighting. There are also dogs that die in this book in quite violent and horrific circumstances. So if animal cruelty isn't something that you want to read, this is probably one for you to avoid. Something good to point out about this book, though, is that while it is a debut, it's written so beautifully. There are times that I didn't even feel like this was a debut because it was written so well. The pacing is a little bit slow at times, I thought, but overall, it's written so beautifully and the writing all flows really well together. And something that also is commendable is that there are so many people in this book with nicknames. That's a huge thing in Ireland. There's a lot of people whose first names I don't actually even know because they've had a nickname for such a long time that even if I asked my parents, they'd also struggle to think of that person's first name. I think it's such an inherent thing in Irish culture that people will just get a nickname and stick to it, that seeing it in the pages of this book really did make it feel like home. Something else to shout out is that one of the narrators for the audiobook is Mo Dunford, who comes from Dungarvan, about 30 or so minutes from where I grew up. I think Mo is the voice of Joe in this book. I'm not entirely sure. I could never find out which one he was. But I always love seeing somebody from my home county who's mentioned in any kind of a way. So this was just a little special connection for me. Well, I told you there would be another Claire Keegan book on this list, and I also read So Late in the Day by her in March. I gave this book a 4.5-star rating, and it is a really interesting short story. You follow Cathal on what seems like a regular Friday in his life. He is finishing up his job as an accountant in Dublin and heading back home. But as you start to get deeper into the book, you realise that this isn't just a regular Friday. This should have been one of the most important days in Cahill's life, and you realise the things that have happened and the dominoes that fell to get us to where we are now. This book is rife with misogyny. I'm going to say that straight out off the bat. There is so much hatred towards women throughout this book. I started out thinking maybe Cahill is just a miser because everything seems to be about money and where he can save up and where he can scrimp and where he can stop spending. But as you go deeper throughout this book, you realize that he just hates women. And I think that this is also a really great look at nature versus nurture, because when you look back at Cahill's childhood, the atmosphere that he would have had back at home and the life that he had with his father, and the attitude that his father had toward his mother, then you start to realise where Cahill has picked it up from. There were a couple of questions that I had throughout this book that did eventually end up getting answered, but there is one that I still don't know about. If Cahill and Sabine had gone their separate ways, how come Cahill is left with Matilda the cat? I have no idea how that came to be, and I would still love to get an answer to that one, but all of the other questions that I had were starting to become a little bit more obvious as I went through this book. It's super short. I think it's only about 115 or so pages. So if you are looking for a story that's going to grip you in, but also make you a little bit angry, this is definitely the one to go for. Then I read two children's historical fiction books that are part of the same series, so I'm just going to talk about them in tandem. I read Wildflower Girl and Fields of Home, both by Marita Conlon McKenna. These are the second two books in the Under the Hawthorn Tree series. This is about three children who escaped from home during the famine and the clutches of the workhouse and the possibility of going to the despair and the disease that was rife there, and headed across the country to Castle Taggart, where two aunts of their mother were living. In Wildflower Girl, you are following the youngest girl, Peggy, who is now 13 years old and taking off from Ireland to go for a new life in America. I thought that this was such an interesting story. It really does give a look as to what life was like on the coffin ships, which was the name given to these ships that were taking people from Ireland to their new lives in America, because the death rate on these ships was huge. There was so much disease and sickness and hunger that lots of people actually didn't make the other side of the journey. But Peggy is one of the successful ones, and she ends up in Boston and sets up a new life for herself as a cook and a housemaid and a seamstress for a well to do family in the area. Then, in Fields of Home, you are following Eiley and Michael, the two siblings who are left behind. Eiley has gotten married and now has two children, and Michael is working as a stable boy in the big house in town. I thought that this was such an interesting look at what life was like after the famine, because people didn't go straight away from famine is over, prosperity. I thought it was such a great way to make the famine more accessible for children who are about 10 to 12 years old. It really humanizes them, brings it down to people who are on their level, and it explains all of the things that people went through. It explains the financial troubles that people had, all of the things that they had gone through, and it never really talks down to them. It never infantilizes them. It makes it all really accessible. Both Wildflower Girl and Fields of Home got a 4-star rating from me. I think they are some of the best children's books that Ireland has to offer, and I do think that the entire trilogy should be in every single classroom in every single library across the country. After that, I read Franke by Graham Norton. Yes, that Graham Norton, and I gave this a 5-star rating because it just blew me away from the first page right to the last. This book is about Franke, or Frances. We meet her when she is about 11 years old. Her parents have just died in a car crash, and she is now going to live with her aunt and uncle. Her uncle is a rector in the community, and he is quite well to do and quite well respected by the entire community. As Franke grows up, she starts to get in some pretty sticky situations. She is forced into marriage with an elder member of the clergy, and things really do not work out between the two of them. There is abuse, there is isolation, there is infidelity, and Franke is just basically expected to grin and bear it. However, that doesn't sound like the life for her, so she, along with the help of her friend Nora, escapes off to London for a brand new life. And I absolutely loved seeing this. I really love seeing women changing up their atmosphere and changing up their situation and just going and live their true selves. I really loved seeing Franke make everything work for herself in London, but it was when she moved to New York that things really started to explode for her. I feel like her movement to New York was a little bit unplanned, particularly because she was only there on a work trip, and the partner that she was with on her work trip basically stole any way that Franke had of getting back into the country. But she made the best of the bad situation. She met her future husband, she met his family, and she really started to set up roots. Franke wanted to work as a chef for her entire life. She had gone to culinary school, she had learned a whole lot to hone her craft, and I thought it was so wonderful watching her work her way up from kind of a waitress and porter in a restaurant to basically running the entire show. I loved the relationship between Franke and Madame Pom. Madame Pom was such a vibrant and wonderful character, and I absolutely loved every inch of reading of her. There were a whole lot of other things in this book that were absolutely heartbreaking. Franke is in New York in the 1980s, which was pretty much at the height of the AIDS crisis. And obviously there's a lot of people that she loses to AIDS, and there is a whole lot of heartbreak and death and just pain and sadness that she goes through for her entire life. Now Franke is living back in London. She's in her 80s, and she's recently had a fall where she's broken her ankle. She's living still around her friend Nora, who comes in now and then to check up on her, but Nora has to go away for a couple of days and brings in a young boy named Damien. Damien grew up also in West Cork, but he's also been living in London as a carer for a couple of years. He comes in to take care of Franke, set her up for bed, give her some help around the house, and while he is there, Franke tells him her entire life story, start to end, and how she ended up back here. I really loved the friendship between Franke and Damien. It's not something that you would ever expect them to gel about, but they just got on like a house on fire. I was so devastated by the ending of this book. I am still pretty much recovering from it. It was written so beautifully, but it is so heartbreaking. I know that Graham Norton is an absolutely phenomenal writer because I've read other books from his and been blown away by them. A Keeper was one of the best books that I read in 2022, and I remember being basically stapled to my reading chair in the corner just with a cup of coffee and the book, and I did not get up for about 3 hours until I had read the entire way through this book. I know he's got a phenomenal storytelling quality, and I cannot wait to see if he's got any more up his sleeve. Then I read Weird Ireland by Brinsley McNamara, and this was one that I got as a Christmas present from my brother because he said it would be a really great way of traveling around my home island while I couldn't get home. And he was absolutely bang on. Brinsley has got an Instagram and TikTok account called Weird Ireland, where he will introduce you to some of the little intricacies about our island. All of the little weird things like the magic road, where if you stop your car, it kind of looks like the car is rolling uphill. All of the fairy forts that we have around and why you really shouldn't fuck with them. All of the different town names and how it is that they came to be called that. I thought it was such an interesting story. It doesn't just go through the history of the island, but it also goes through a couple of pop culture things, like our obsession with different foodstuffs and different drinks across the country, all of the snack things that you will see in Irish supermarkets that you won't see anywhere else, the sports that we do, some of the little intricacies that we have in that area, and I absolutely loved this. If you want to learn a little bit more about Ireland, but you don't want to pick this book up, it might be a better introduction to take a look at the Weird Ireland account so that you can see what kind of things are going to pop up here. But there were a couple of things in here that didn't even take place on that Instagram account. There is also a historical area really close to my house that I don't think is particularly well known because where I come from is so small and unknown that I was so surprised to see it actually being named in this book. So Brinsley, thank you for giving us a little shout out. Finally, I read Don't Touch My Hair by Emma DeWeary. I feel like as a white person, I don't really have a whole lot that I can say about this book, but it does teach you a whole lot about Black culture, Black people's hair, and just how important it is as a social construct, as a social identifier, the history of it, and how it has been treated across the world. I also thought it was really interesting to see Black people's hair and all of that during the slavery time in the US and just how people had reacted to it. There were some wives of the slave owners who were so jealous of the hair that these women had that they would even go as far as to gouging their eyes out because they didn't want them to see how beautiful they looked. It was such a heartbreaking at times story. There were so many people whose lives that I had learned about who I had never heard about before. And I think it's so interesting and so important to learn about these people and to give their names power and to give their stories airtime because otherwise we are never going to learn about them. But I also thought that it was interesting to learn about Emma's own personal experience of her hair and her personal relationship with it, about how she used to chemically straighten it and how she used to treat it. And then when she became pregnant, stopped doing so because she wanted her daughter, if she were to have one, to be proud of who she was, to be proud of her heritage, and to wear her hair exactly as it was intended to be worn. I thought it was such a phenomenal book. I know Emma has got another book called What White People Can Do Next, and I am definitely going to be on the hunt for that one because I took so much from Don't Touch My Hair. I think I'm going to take even more from What White People Can Do Next. That is how my reading fared in March. What was the best book that you read across the month, or is there something that you cannot wait to read across April? If you'd love to leave me a comment, if you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the shamrock emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.